Data Storytellers, another episode of the Data Storytellers podcast. And today on the show, I have with me Sophine Zhang, who is the head of data science over at Cisco Meraki. And we've been preparing for this episode for a while. I had the pleasure of diving into Sophine's playbook of change management. And today we are going to immortalize the inspiration. So Sophine, first of all, welcome on the show.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. And hello, everyone.
Yeah,
I'm Sophie. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, and we're gonna explore your career journey a little bit, and then I just want to zoom in on a few of those insights that you shared with me during your playbook presentation. So first of all, and I don't even know the answer to this question, so I never asked you before, but how did you become a data science practitioner? I know that we kind of touched on it a little bit, but I would be interested in some of the motivations that kind of have driven you into the leadership role that you have today.
Yeah, certainly. So my journey in the data field began with honestly curiosity and desire to answer questions with data when I started my career as what we would call today actually an analytics engineer. So basically people who work on data engineering and also data analysis. And this is in the finance industry. And I was often puzzled by the trend I'm seeing in data, but was not able to explain them well and let alone providing insights and foresight. So I'm sure this is prevalent in everyone's job, no matter you're a data analytics professional or not. And that kind of driven me to think more about, is there a way that we can leverage different techniques, and also cultivating the overall culture for the organization so everybody is equipped, right, with the enhanced data literacy in the daily work that they are performing.
Absolutely. And so what was your progression in the field? So what was the nature of your first role? And then how did you acquire more and more responsibility to become a leader in the field?
Yeah, I think a lot of it come down to leading without authority and really being an owner of the areas that you're supporting. So I have experimented, I was explored with product data science, analytics, marketing, business analytics, and data science, multiple different areas. And over time, I began, get interested more into the end-to-end data journey from its generation curation to leveraging it for decision making and even to kind of more predictive machine learning and data science. So that's when I kind of grew myself towards that role by gaining the necessary business acumen, the domain expertise, and also like the knowledge in a certain data field. And then that kind of gave me the very strong foundation for me to make impact and working with and leading with teams that can ultimately contribute to the overall success of the organizations.
So you mentioned business acumen, and this is something that often comes up, obviously, when you're trying to drive business impact as a leader, and often the reason why data teams don't perform as well as they could is a lack of business acumen. So
Right.
what was your relationship with that specifically? So what were maybe some of the early tensions of, hey, maybe I need to develop myself here, and then how did you acquire that business acumen?
Yeah, so this is definitely a lot of it through experience. I would say many data professionals who I worked with or myself early in the career are quite obsessed with the technical detail. Right, a lot of times we're speaking the technical language really well, but then when we think about our ability to really understand and communicate that data as information and insight, that's really the business acumen come in. And when you see, for example, you see the sales trend going up by 50% or 100%, what does that mean? Like oftentimes we leave it as that. We said, okay, the sales has gone up, by 50%, but does that tell us we are, ahead of the goal, we're meeting that goal, we're lagging behind, and what's reason behind contributing to this 50% growth, right? So I think that's a lot of the necessary detail, like thinking about ourselves as an owner for this problem. Like if I was tasked to understand it further, I wouldn't be staying just on understanding, the question in terms of the growth, but I would certainly dive more into where the growth opportunities are. And that's where I think over time you will develop your own understanding, and your acumen become kind of a natural result as you're learning and gaining your experience in the field.
And thinking about the same results and the same facts, but in different contexts, on a different dimension. And just lingering a little bit on your career still. So, what would you say were the major milestones of your career? So now you are with Cisco Meraki, but you're also the VP of Data Science at Delivery Hero, right? So how do you see the major milestones of your career as your role and responsibilities progressed?
Yeah, so I think the major milestone, there are at least, I would say, three to begin with. Is you enter your career, you're a junior sort of data scientist, ML engineer, or analyst, right? And then you become senior, and that typically takes anywhere between 2 to 5 years, depending on the industry and depending on the field. And at that point, you would bifurcate to think about, do I want to continue to be an individual contributor, or do I want to be, a people manager, right? So that happened to me around kind of, I would say, fifth year into my career. I was a lot senior. I was able to own and really showcase success track record and gaining more kind of trust and reliability, right, within the organization. So I began to manage people, but initially more like a technical lead. And that's typically a role many people play. And you can even toggle between a tech lead slash manager position early on, right? You manage a small team of 2 to 3 people. You're still hands-on, involved with certain percentage of your time on actual project. At the same time, you're growing your career, understanding what it is when you have to delegate stuff to other people. Right? How do you ensure the quality and the delivery when you're no longer the sole owner of that project? I think that is a change that happened to many that wants to go their level and takes a lot of iteration on who you're working with, right? What's your style? How can you be comfortable? And I think the trap that I fall into is be very, very like, even though not deliberately or intentionally, but actually I was called a micromanager for many reasons, right? Because the fear of letting go your technical strength, right, and putting it on someone else, I think that's kind of you have to unlearn it. You have to know at this point your success depends on your team, no longer kind of your technical capability, right? So I think that's the first thing. And once you get there, you're able to accumulate more experience in managing people. You kind of know how do you work out the dynamics, right? How do you do situational management and coaching your team? You give them more responsibility. And the next part from there is not necessarily from a manager to senior manager, because that oftentimes is seniority and just expansion of your scope. To the director level, I would say the mid management was another key milestone for me. I think that at that very moment, it's a lot requirement for strategic thinking, for alignment with other leaders and functional leaders within the organization to be able to develop a roadmap that you can stand behind, right? You can own and lead your team through it. So that was, I luckily had a jump start there. Almost just within the year, I went from manager to senior manager to director because of circumstances, right? My previous the director in that position had to leave for personal reason, so I was put on the spot. Now, I'm not to say this is the day pass for many people, but for me, I was basically accumulating all the experience, and then at that moment, I just rose to the occasion. So I think when you're ready, when you learn from others, and you catch that opportunity, certainly that's the moment for you to shine. It was very painful for the first 6 months, I'm not going to lie, when I went from a senior manager to director, right? A much larger team, suddenly like tripled in size. So many things are changing. You have to understand, where do you draw the line? How do you clear your mind, your headspace to know, now what's my priority for this week, right? What's my priority for today? And at times you even have to extract yourself out of the daily routine to think a bit more about, am I actually meeting my long-term, strategy with the team, or am I focusing or over-rotating on my short-term operations? So that's like another thing that I really have to balance. And you have to also be still at the same time staying on top of what the team is focusing on, right? Keeping them engaged, like leveraging a lot of conversation with skip levels, for example, and cross-functional partners is very important as you kind of own a bigger part of the function and you become the lead organization. And I think beyond that is kind of the third milestone is when you become an even senior leader. This is where you become a VP or even, senior director in some company, depending which organization. Then you become the owner of a certain area, right? Because at the direct level, you could be, for example, owning product data science or analytics, but you have peers who are owning marketing. But now if you're the head of data or head of data science, you're owning the entirety of it. I think that calls for more, what I would say is that visionary piece. No longer just a strategic and roadmap. Your vision has to be ahead of the game. You have to think about what do you need to do to be ahead of the competitions, right? For how do you lead your team, your organization to contribute meaningfully to the success of the entire group. And I think that is asking a lot more than just people management, just understanding over strategy and being able to execute. That means this person has to have that level of, I would say, expertise and technical relevance still need to be there, because this is where and you get a strong sense about what's out in the market, right? How do you bring back to the team? But at the same time, you need to identify those critical activities or opportunities, I should say, for your team so they get the necessary visibility and impact that they deserve. And I think a lot of that is not trivial. And I would even, go ahead and say, like, I am still learning and going through that myself, right, as we speak, because organization will evolve. Like you suddenly will be, managing a lot larger team. You have multiple location. It's geo-distributed, right? You have different level. So the complexity just really, really grow. And how do you really help synthesize the team's work and present it in a manner that everybody can get the level of understanding and support your group? I think that's a lot of more ask, right, at the even beyond kind of a direct level, in my point of view.
Absolutely. So it's cool because you had that progression pretty quickly, and it was all about being prepared for the opportunity. You never know when it will present itself, and that kind of pressure cooker, in a way, it always like forces you to find the best tools and techniques. So in reflection now, because you are basically, so right now, your role, if you wouldn't mind just introducing the audience to what you do now exactly, and I will have a few questions around some of your tools of management and strategic
Yeah,
leadership.
of course. So right now, my team essentially is a centralized data team for Meraki, right? We are multidisciplinary, so we have data infrastructure, data engineering, data analytics, data science, and also ML ops and engineering. So full stack. Which means everything from your data warehousing needs, your dedicated strategic analytics and business analytics and product analytics requirement, to all the way productionizing like ML and AI solutions. It's all within this team. And hence, our stakeholders are the entire company and even beyond Meraki into the Cisco land. So thinking about, what does it mean to laying out, like I said, like earlier, like vision, right, for the whole team, and how do you kind of translate it into roadmap that you need to execute on for this year, for each quarter, and how do you stay on top of making sure your OKRs is also related, right, and contributing to the high level corporate strategy and priority. I think a lot of that work falls on my shoulder and my leaders to making sure that we are in sync.
Absolutely. So now, just a reflection. So imagine that you're talking to someone who is going through a similar transformation, and this person is new in the VP role, right? So quick succession of promotions. And now, if you had to focus on the 80-20, like 20% of the tools that really helped you out the most, that gave you 80% of that edge, that help you actually excel in your role. What are some of those like tools and techniques that you're using? That it can be anything. It can be about how you manage your day. It can be about how you manage the tasks of your team. It can be about something that you're personally in love with. I don't know, it's like agile project management, whatever you guys use. Like, what are some of those key tools that you think you would recommend someone in a similar situation to focus on?
Yeah. The way this was a while back, I almost forgot the name of the tool, but it was essentially asking us to evaluate, it's the 4 E's. Okay. The first one is called exploration. The second one is called execution. The third one is called expertise. And the last one, I think, is called examination. So what that means is they're basically evaluating, like, it's a self-assessment tool. You look at yourself and saying, out of the four, which one do you over rotate? Do you need to deliberately make more effort? And for me, it turns out I'm very good at examination and execution. So what that means, like, I can quickly recognize a problem, match it to my past experience, and then see the pattern and leverage smart execution, get results. Right. I succeed in my career that way, no matter how much a scope change. I would say, like, blessed with the gift to do that. But at the same time, though, I realized as a leader, I was somewhat not so excited about exploring, which means innovating was not necessarily the first thing on my mind. Because when a team is talking about, some of my teams are more research oriented, they have a academic background, like they're a PhD, so they like to explore new ideas, and oftentimes that's where the back and forth comes in, right? And that's the other thing. I think I misspoke. It's actually not expertise, excitement, which is how you're exciting your team, right? Showing them the vision, showing them what it is like, rather than just focusing on the task at hand. So those two, I would say, as I've become more and more senior leader, I had to do a lot more on excite as well as explore for the team, for myself and for others, not just execution, right? Because, like, as I'm dedicating to others, it actually doesn't matter how well I execute leading the project. It's how my team can actually, right, take that off my plate. So I'm freed up to have more of the conversations on the strategic level. Like, for example, right now, we're doing a lot of effort on AI. We're putting a lot of emphasis. But if I think about that, there is a balance. Think about, how much do I give the opportunity for the team to explore? They're excited. Everybody, no problem. We're excited. We have that roadmap, right? But how much do we put that emphasis on actually executing? And I think as I look through it, I would share the same with my leaders, right? And making sure that we're always kind of periodically aligning, so we are on track to both drive the result and also keep the team highly engaged throughout the whole time.
That's interesting to me, these 4 E's. I think I've heard it before, but never heard it like laid out like this. And it also forces me to kind of self-reflect and examine, because like, I fall mostly on, like, I very heavily over-rotate because of my personality on the innovation side of things, right? I love to explore, kind of pioneer, and just jump in, cut the cord, burn the ships, whatever analogy you want to use. And usually the execution is like the part that I'm like, okay, we're gonna deal with that later, and my business partner is kind of the opposite. So Paul
Right.
is also a co-host of the podcast, and he's really good at execution, very, like, operational in his thinking. So it's a good complementary skill set. But how do you actually assess yourself? So this is like self-referential questions that you answer, or how does the assessment
Yeah.
work?
I need to find it out the tool. So I was introduced actually by one of my leaders who used to work at LinkedIn. Okay. So this is actually back at Course Hero, when I was the VP of data there. So this individual joined the team and we were discussing, okay, we're seeing, some dynamics within the team that can be really improved. And we talk about how can we leverage some tool, like some team use personality test, right? Some people use other assessment. And this was introduced by this individual. And we looked through it and said, oh, this is actually very helpful. Basically, it's telling you, like, you in the team, you may have a diverse team that people have, like you said, different dimensions, you're complementary to each other. You may also have a team that you all are very much, execution or exploration focused, right? I think it's actually a list of questions that actually help you assess where you stand on the scale of 1 to 5, for example, on certain area. Then we'll give you sort of a manuscript or instruction on, okay, now you need to put more deliberate effort, right? Like for me, would be on exploration and excite for the team. So that's kind of what happened. And they talk about how your direct reports, how they are the same or different, and how the two of you can work together to make that dynamic, right, more maximized in terms of the value generated. It's actually very useful. Yeah, I need to find the name and circle the group. It's been a while. I still have the report with me, but I do not remember the tool that we subscribe with.
Yeah. Actually, so someone else who's joining the masterclass is Rebecca well. So
Mm-hmm.
Rebecca works for Train Technologies, and
Mm-hmm.
he's a senior analytics leader there.
Mm-hmm.
And we just recorded a podcast, and we also dove into the personality test and the applicability of those. Right? We actually looked at the
Mm-hmm.
Myers-Briggs test, which actually gives you the personality type that you have. For example, I'm ENFP. I don't know if you've
Yeah,
probably
yeah.
heard that
Yeah,
INTJ.
yeah, I have. I
Uh,
have not tested because there's so many questions in that.
I know. So I can recommend one is the 16 personalities. And look,
Okay.
with these things, so you need to look at how it's actually applicable to your work. Also, a pitfall is that often people answer the questions based on what they wish they were like,
I
instead of
see.
how they are. In my experience, though, it's highly applicable because whenever I hire someone, I like to understand what kind of personality they are. And when I hire someone,
Right.
I always like to understand the potential pitfalls of working together and how can we
Mm-hmm.
make our collaboration more effective, right? And also, I
Mm-hmm.
think I misspoke before. I said that you were at a Delivery Hero, but you were at Course Hero, VP of
Mm-hmm.
Data and Insights. Yes,
Yeah.
yes. So it was different. So actually, for example, I just remember that you also worked for Uber between
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
2015 December, so 1.5 years. So that was like growth marketing analytics.
Mm-hmm.
I imagine that for a company like Uber, they are very experimental with their marketing.
Mm-hmm.
It's all about like innovation, right? So, for example, was that an opportunity for you in that position? Even though I see that at that point, we're in a VP, it was work. I don't know what
Yeah, a
capacity.
technical lead, a team lead. Yeah.
Okay, exactly. So actually, even being exposed to that kind of environment, did that influence you and kind of push you to become more innovative
Mhm.
when you became a leader? You think?
Yeah. So the way I think, so my experience at Uber, I would say I'm very thankful. At the
Mm-hmm.
same time, it is not something that I signed up for. And I'll explain a bit more. I had many manager changes during that year and a half, which is kind
Mm-hmm.
of one of the reasons that I decided to go back to Ancestry, where I started,
Mm-hmm.
my
Mm-hmm.
major career in tech, right? And that to some extent also was helpful in a way because I was essentially looking after myself in the sense of what exactly I want in my career. Because I was on marketing growth analytics team, but the growth analytics is interesting, right? Because when that term is put together, it's actually my point of view, a catch-all
Mm-hmm.
from sales, marketing, product operation, everything. So which is great, which also means I was given an opportunity to say which angle I want to explore. I can go more into marketing data science, thinking about marketing mix model and attribution. I can also go more into the growth analytics and understanding the customer aspect, right? Thinking about what is your acquisition strategy, particularly. And I can also go into like the ops and CRM, customer relationship management. And interesting enough, I tried all of them during that year and a half, right? For others, they might not have that opportunity. At the same time, as the company was growing, the function was sort of showing up more. I was able to manage people directly or indirectly as a team lead. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So that was kind of very helpful because I had a pretty wide spread of information very soon. And a lot of attention focus is how do I get quickly, like the speed to value? Because there's no time for you to perfect a particular solution. It's about how do you get to the value with the simplest approach. That had changed a lot of my thinking about, oh, I need to use a very sophisticated approach, right? Because I think sophistication is only making sense depending on the actual use cases. And you
Mm-hmm.
have the opportunity to iterate on top of it and adjust for it if you design the framework initially with that in mind. So I think
Mm-hmm.
that it was very helpful and learned quite a bit on the job, and which influenced a lot of my decision and approaches till this day.
And I see that it was like a triumphant coming home to Ancestry because when you left, you were a senior product analyst, but then you turned as the head of product analytics, right? So,
That's right. Yeah, that's
uh,
where, like I mentioned, like in a year, I went from manager to director, basically, very
mhm,
quickly, right? Like I think a lot of my learning was helpful. Bringing those to an organization that really need kind of a dedicated focus on product, and it's also kind of me kind of exploring marketing versus product growth and then with product. So that was part of that journey, seeing what means to me until I realized, hey, I want to be the head of data, everything data, right?
hmm,
Doesn't have to pick my battle to see is a particular function area, but end of day data can speak to no matter who, right? And I think that's where like a lot of that realization and just kind of realize learning come together.
mhm. And actually, when you went to Course Hero,
Mhm.
so that kind of pivot, that was now you're a VP. So what was your actual mandate there? Because Course Hero, I understand that they kind of focused on growth, right? In
Mhm.
general, it's like a high
Mhm.
growth company, and
Mhm.
I just assume that data was at the heart of that
Yeah.
those growth
Mhm.
initiatives, right? So
Yeah.
what was your ultimate mandate there? Did you have kind of like a North Star metric
Yeah.
that you needed to leverage?
Yeah. So like I think this story kind of goes in many of my leadership roles is going to an organization, assessing where they are in terms of the data-driven culture maturity level, right? And looking at, is it the data foundation tooling? Is it analytics best practice? Or is it a machine learning application? Like I have to look through like the data literacy. So look at various levels and where things are. You're right. Course Hero is very much, I would say, they're already data driven. They're making decisions based on data and well informed, but it's more about putting the structure, making
Hmm.
sure that I think this is where kind of the leadership isn't coming in. Like you're aligned and your team are actually like producing that energy and contributing to the overall objectives in a meaningful way.
Hmm.
So even though, let's say, for example, you may have a dashboard today, but the dashboard might not be very well structured to give you overarching understanding on the executive level how things are. Right. So
Yeah.
this is some of the early project. Oftentimes when I go into organization, just basically I say, do you have somewhere tell me how your business is operating? What are your KPIs? So if you're talking about my North Star is I need to first deliver that. And you
Hmm.
understand where they are. If they don't, if you tell me, hey, I'm pulling it manually today, it's in PowerPoint, it's in this Google Sheet, then that tells me, okay, the decision making definitely is scattered, right? Because you don't have a source of truth. So that's the first thing like I look at. Then once I have that, and I look at, okay, how is the team planning their work? So this goes to kind of another tool, which is agile management, right? I mean, people often speak about, okay, I'm a proponent of agile, I love agile, but in reality, people practice differently. There's no
Hmm.
like, cookie cutter application that you can talk about. But to me, I think come to agile, end of day, a lot of key things, predictability for sure,
Yeah.
transparency and accuracy, right? So I will look at the team. I look at, okay, sometimes they tell me, oh, I just use a Kanban. No problem. Even if you use a Kanban, you do not use, the other Scrum process, you should still get an understanding of your predictability. Now, why does it matter? Because as a team, ultimately, everything is, you can argue, but is about our ability to really drive impact. And how do you get that impact with the time and effort you spend? Is making sure you're benefiting by looking through how you're spending your time. Are you spending that efficiently, right? So, and I spoke to a team. They said, okay, I just taking the request, look through them, and then we prioritize amongst like maybe 10 or 15 people. I said, okay, that potentially could be a problem. One, I have learned over time for certain area, especially when you get more deeper into marketing or product, that embedded relationship is very important. Meaning like embedding a data scientist or data analyst or even ML engineer into a certain area and have them be an equal partner where they can build the rapport over time is very critical. If you have a shared queue and you have people who are essentially like clients, they're switching a lot of context, you're going to find yourself with lots of overhead. And then
Hmm.
in between that, the lack of documentation, lack of code review process, and the review process will give you even more trouble, right? So I going in a lot of it is about understanding, how the team operate. I'm not saying my style is the style, but I think it have
Yeah.
worked for me and worked for many organizations to essentially put things structure and the ducks in a row.
So we spoke because agile is one of those topics. We had an episode last year with Pete Scherf,
Hmm.
who's the VP of
Hmm.
Enterprise Research and Analytics at Swire Coca-Cola, and he's
Hmm.
a big agile proponent.
Hmm.
And he said the same thing, that it's a cliche, but it's not like one size fits all, and there are so many elements of, okay, what aligns
Hmm.
to the team's structure, the culture, what kind of tools you're going to use. I think his answer was that whatever tool you're actually going to end up using, right?
Yeah,
So,
yeah, I agree.
and with that, so actually, we are working with an organization right now, kind of
Hmm.
helping them to articulate and drive the
Hmm.
right story, both within the team and also externally for the business. They feel like they
Hmm.
are very reactive right now. They're kind of on their
Mhm.
back foot in terms of
Mhm.
becoming the report vending machine, and they want to
Mhm.
become more proactive, become
Mhm.
trusted advisors in the business. And they're also working through some internal difficulties to make sure that within the analytics function itself, for example, between BI and reporting, there's like a
Mhm.
good channel of communication and better
Mhm.
project management so they can focus and
Mhm.
prioritize what's important. So from that perspective, agile is one of those things that they are considering, but they're trying to rally the organization around that and getting people to commit to that, right?
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
I know that this might be a little bit of a tangent, but maybe we could
Mhm.
spend a minute or two here because you have experience in the field. That first of all, how would you describe the difference between simply working with a Kanban and working with agile, and how would you actually sell it
Mhm.
to that organization? Hey, you should adopt
Mhm.
agile because it will give you X, Y, and Z benefit. How would that look like from your perspective?
Yeah. So kind of, again, like this is my understanding, right? So
Mhm,
within Agile, you can run as a Scrum, you can also run, through a Kanban mode. Now they focus slightly differently when you come to the actual, like, sprintly operation. Typically, you have some kind of sprint. It could be 2 weeks, could be 4 weeks. If you're in a Scrum team, you're focusing on, okay, I have a set timeline, right? And within a particular timeline, I'm looking at my velocity. I'm looking at, how well I am burning down my epics over that
okay.
period of time, right? But if you're running a Kanban, you're going to focus a lot on your throughput
Yeah.
and what we call like work in progress, right? Ultimately, you're still trying to say, okay, I'm getting more things, I'm getting standardized understanding of the tickets I can go through. Hence, in the end, you're still driving overall productivity and agility. But ultimately, I would think about this is kind of a, I would say, I wouldn't say macro, but at least like a deeper view. Beyond that, there are another system that needs to be introduced, which is OKR.
Yeah.
Oftentimes, company already have OKR, then they're struggling to think about how do I get this two to work together, right? We talk a lot about how do I even link the corporate OKR into the epics, the initiatives, the work stream I have in Agile. So that's where I think ultimately come down to any organization will have essentially some sort of plan. When OKR started, even before that, like, a couple of decades ago, people have already talked about corporate management, right?
Mhm,
Planning.
mhm,
So
mhm.
that's kind of the foundation of the OKR system. Then once you have OKR was actually coined back at Google, right? John Doerr, who is also the writer of the book What Track What Matters or Measure What Matters, right?
Yeah.
So if you think about it, is if you have an OKR, then typically in an organization you have top down and bottoms up OKR. And that will basically map out very well, if you do quarterly or biannual planning, however the organization does, where your things are, and you would add additional level in terms of your OKR from corporate strategy, right, all the way to the team's epic. And this will essentially get, I would say, so I misspoke, your team level OKR.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
this will get mapped to your agile. Then it's very clear, okay, how is my work actually translating into contributing to the OKR? And that's actually the most difficult part because your OKR, for example, could focus on driving, X% increase your churn rate. Decreasing your churn rate and your retention rate. But then your actual work is about building maybe a data science model or putting particular, sales or post sales like strategy into place, right? So that work is where I would say the data literacy and data maturity also come in. Because you
Mhm,
need to
mhm.
understand the metric, you need to understand the interconnectedness of the metric in order to do that. I think a lot of times what happened is we have the structure, you have okay, agile, they're not really working in congruence with each other. And end of the day, you ended up with manually having to report out your status on the OKR, your contribution. And that's not an easy problem to solve, especially if you have multiple cross teams. So what
Mhm.
I tend to do is start small, which is start with my own team, see how things are operating, right? Making sure they understand the agile best practice. Then kind of going with my peers and even organizational level, looking at how are we doing planning, how things are, and then identifying some pilot teams that can actually leverage and recommend it best practice, right? That speaks to the organization and also carries the organization kind of characteristic, then being able to see the results. Because if we don't see that result and we just basically made a change in the system, no matter using Jira or any other tool, I think that would defeat the whole purpose because you just add an additional process to the entire
Mhm,
organization, which nobody would
mhm.
appreciate, right? No matter they are, technical program managers or engineering managers in the end.
Yeah, additional bureaucracy
Exactly.
and
Yeah.
the burden. And yeah, no one appreciates that. So maybe actually this is a great segue into often in our conversations, both in the community and the conversations that you and I've been having.
Hmm.
Data-driven culture has been this central theme, and it's being thrown around all the time. So first of all, and this is also very much in our playbook as well as as the
Hmm.
central theme. So the cultural challenges are very different from encountering challenges on the technical side of things,
Hmm.
right? So
Hmm.
with regards to culture, what have you found uh, over the years to be the most challenging aspects of data-driven culture change in
Hmm.
a large organization from your
Hmm.
perspective? And even what does that mean? What is data-driven culture from your
Hmm.
point of view?
Yeah, I think the data-driven culture, like as far as I'm concerned, it's really about decisions are made based on data analytics and interpretation. I described earlier talking about I always go to an organization, quickly assessing where they are in terms of the culture maturity, is to look at, okay, do you have a central, like some form of executive dashboard where you have key drivers, you understand the interconnectedness of your KPIs, right? That tells me a lot about how well they have, really explored and evolved in that area. And I think the key challenge there is where to start. Now, you say you create an executive dashboard. Initially, you're not going to know every single part. So, do you start with your financial understanding metrics, or do you start with your product engagement? Do you start with your marketing attribution? What do you start with your operations, right? I think it's where to start. How do you get alignment on the overarching metric framework? Is by far the most time consuming in almost all the organization I went in,
Mm.
because people have existing knowledge, right? They have institutional knowledge, have experience already, and they are so comfortable making a call with or without data. And oftentimes they may be right. So in order to convince them, you have to show some very quick value and early win.
Mhm.
That also means the trust in the data has to come first, then the insight, and it's the quality and the value that insight is providing. So
Mhm.
identify that important key initiative that will speak to a lot more people, especially people who can sponsor you in the future. I think is one critical task, because you won't be able to tackle every single team. You won't be able to reach out to every single team right away.
So kind of capture that high leverage opportunity.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
what are the telltale signs from your perspective of
Mhm.
such initiative? Like, how do you identify that? What are the key indicators of no,
Mhm.
this is an ideal target for you to pursue?
Yeah. So there are a few. Like I tend to start with understanding the company's global priority, right?
Mhm.
What are they focusing on? Are they focusing on driving the efficiency of engineering team? Are they focusing on top line revenues and they see competitive, stretch? Or are they focusing on, really making sure they are being customer centric and having good understanding on the user experience, right? There are a few dimensions. So once I understand that and I say, okay, how are these information being surfaced? What forums and what format are they being shared today? Then you trickle it down. Like there must be some executive forum that's being shared, and you understand the format today. Like, do they have kind of a common way to assemble that information? Then you kind of go walk down the line to understand individuals, right? Who are PMs, engineers, ICs, or marketing managers. How are they making and understanding that data? So you
Mhm.
need to kind of pick a one use case. Like in this particular case, let's say we started with understanding financial performance, right? You went all the way down, you identify the financial analyst, you see how they're making the decision. Then you see where the role, I would say like the hurdles or frictions they are going through running that process. This is where you see, are data being siloed? Are there different sources of data? Are there different definitions of the metric being used? So
Mhm.
therefore, you can pinpoint, okay, is this more of a tool, technology, or people? And you work through. Once you get a success and for people to see the value of that particular use case, you're able to expand to the rest of it. So it's a phased approach and you
Mhm.
target. Now, there's no guarantee though, I'll be honest, that you always find the most high leverage one because you're going in, right? You're doing kind of your assessment. But I think what's important is always focus on um, capping the time to value that you're willing to
Mhm.
live with, right? You can't say, go ahead and promise organization, hey, Give me such resource in 6 months, I'll show you. Never, never goes in. I think my timeline is at most a month. I'm
Mm-hmm.
there first 30 days, next 60 days, then 90 days, what I want to achieve. And I really focus on executing on that. And that gives me a good understanding. You do all the listening tour, you can talk to other people, and you come back and you revise it for your rest of the year plan. So I always going in to think about, okay, what I want to do for my whole year being here, my tenure, then work backwards, think about every single 3 month 90-day period, how that look like.
Mm-hmm. And then you focus on actually getting things done, the execution, right? On like, okay, 30 days. What kind of
Exactly,
impact
right.
can
And
we
it
have
could
there?
be trial and error. I take probably a bit lower investment, higher value one, which I, based on information I could gather, then iterate on it and see, okay, what's stopping it from being adopted, right? What's the feedback I'm getting? So I think as long
Mm-hmm.
as you have a good framework or mechanism, how you're getting there, then I'm not worried about, occasional setbacks. I think my
Mm-hmm.
worry is like you just go in, you assume something's going to work, but you didn't really have kind of methodical approach that backing you. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Kind of day-to-day operation. I think that's what I would definitely advise against for people who wants to drive this in their
Mm-hmm.
organization.
Absolutely. And I think even in this conversation, you mentioned leading by leading by example and influencing without authority. And I
Mhm,
remember that when we were talking about your playbook too, you mentioned that setting that grand challenge that can be then broken down into these testable hypotheses and
mhm.
KPIs. That's like central to that, right? But would you mind just talking a little bit more about this idea of leading by example and influencing without authority? What does that mean to you?
Yeah. So the way I think about it is, as kind of you get to a leadership position, you're working with your peers across multiple functions, right? And just take actually the example we just talked about. Like, I'm not a project management expert, but I actually took the work for agile advancement at multiple organizations I'm in.
Mhm.
Only because one, it's an interesting project that you can apply data on, both as analytics and data science, or even to some extent a bit more into kind of predictive analytics. But at the same time, it touches so many teams because cross-functional collaboration and project planning, the do and say to do ratio, which is basically predictability, are often top of mind for many people, right?
Mhm.
And so end of the day is how can you deliver the value with limited resource, limited time within a agreed upon time frame. So I always focus on that a lot. Doesn't matter if I'm the data leader. Like people be a lot of times, like even in Meraki, people look at me like, why is the data leader leading this effort? Doesn't matter. I have interest. I know the data, and I think this will matter to your life and as well as my own team's life. And let's do it. Right. So that's like what I said, leading with authority. Nobody need to tell me, hey, Sophine, you're doing this. Right. I find the problem. I know people benefit from it. I'm willing to put more of my team's resource behind it and then create a virtual squad to see the value.
Hmm.
So I
Uh,
think this is a lot goes a lot, right? Because as you become senior in your kind of career, I don't think the opportunity is going to just like nobody's going to be like assigning you a task, right, or initiative. You have to also identify what that
hmm.
is. So I think
Hmm.
this also comes with it, right? You need to see where the problem is. You need to see what you can do and what you can kind of rally the whole organization around it to achieve that end goal together.
Hmm. And I love that idea that, oh, the people in the business are asking, why is a data leader doing this? And often data analytics faces kind of like a conception problem, a reputation problem,
Mhm.
often, that
Yeah.
they were being to know the data people doing data stuff, or as I
Mhm.
mentioned before, the report vending machine idea. But if you're proactive and you go out on the attack and just focus on, no, what would actually make people's life easier, what would actually help us get to the
Mhm.
goals that we have as a company, and you're willing to kind of steer out of your lane, so to say, and break those conceptions as well.
Exactly.
And
And this also, in sorry to interrupt, that goes to one of your earlier point, right? Talking about business acumen.
Mhm.
Now, this is going to be a strong, I would say, testimonial on the fact that we don't have to be an expert in the domain, but the moment that we're willing to be empathetic and learn about your problem, I can apply the data techniques to solve it with you.
Mhm.
I think this is just kind of really a strong case in point that helps us establish like what a data team can do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you mentioned before also in your playbook the whole idea of data maturity, right? And I
Mhm.
think still like in this conversation we haven't really zoomed in on that element, but what role do you think data maturity plays in your efforts of driving that data centric culture?
Mhm. Yeah. So the data maturity one, the component is about really like how the organization, right? How advanced is the organization's data usage? That goes to like, for example, are you focused a lot more today on just doing ad hoc descriptive understanding analytics, or are you doing kind of a more structured, right, like insights generation through tools and processes, or have you gotten all the way to benefit from your foresight like generation, which is like ML into it? So thinking about where the organization are spending their energy and what's the distribution of that is actually going to be very helpful. And I think a lot of organization that I've seen some kind of the misstep, I would say, is they haven't gotten the initial pieces, which is fully kind of describing your business using metrics, creating that interconnectedness, but they're all the way already into the AI land because
Mm-hmm,
that's how everybody else is talking about,
mm-hmm.
right? AI and Gen AI. I think that's just going to build yourself on the shaky foundation.
Mm-hmm.
So as a leader, like I have to really kind of chime in and a lot of times like provide that thought leadership in forums where with other like functional leaders. Like let's not forget about where our data are and strengthening that, right? Having that quality elevated to a level that we can actually build reliable machine learning applications and AI use cases. So I think that's kind of going in and again, like seeing where you spend the time. Like you may have an organization that you're spending a lot of time on AI, but you're realizing you have not spent time on the other one enough for you to be successful. So those kind of like important and tough discussions are, you know, what we are having now, and also what I have had, right, in my previous experience as well.
And what would be your personal recommendation for someone? Because it's an interesting issue, right? That oh, you would want to ride the hype. The business is
Mhm,
interested and excited
mhm,
about Gen A. Everyone is doing it. So how do you rein them back? What arguments can you make for them to say, oh, okay, you're right. We need to focus on the data maturity, which is
mhm,
for the average business executive, it's
mhm,
not on top of mind. But Gen
mhm,
AI, everyone says that we need to do it. It's a huge opportunity. We're going to miss out on that. So
mhm,
why can't we just build a Gen AI solution to make all the stakeholders happy? What would be your arguments and your approach to, again,
mhm.
rein them back a little bit?
Mhm. Yeah. So the way like is applicable to like my particular situation right here is one, when we invest in any new technology, like we should really look at ROI. So why would I go all the way in until I have a good understanding of its value? So that's first of all, right? An argument I would put forward, which I think luckily as a data team, we also have the tools. Can you A/B test it, right? Can you go with the experimental approach so you can mitigate some of the risk? And then the other thing is understand the cost and efficacy that you're bringing in. So this is, I would say, like a more deeper view through the ROI is how much am I investing, and if I'm putting it to the customer. And some of this has to be done even before you start on the project, right? So people can see where things are. At the same time, you're looking at how the money can be invested in your data foundation and piecing that together and making the strong argument, I would say, case around how this investment will actually trickle down the improvement of your model, which ultimately will drive the business value that we intended for the solution, right? ML solution to be for, is the kind of work that, to be honest, as leader, that I constantly press myself on for me to get better. A lot of it is about persuasion, right?
Yeah.
Persuading us, showing them the data in front of them. Like this is how you invest, this is the ROI you're seeing in each effort. And this is how I am, you know, distributing my team's effort, distributing the investment, right, from my cost center to ensure ultimately you get to that last stage. Because you're showing them this is where you are on your data driven culture, your maturity. This is where you want to get to for each part, each aspect of your maturity, analytics, data, and ML. And this is how I'm going to invest to get you there. right? So they can see the holistic plan. They don't just see AI. They see the entire machine being planned and working together to get us to that final destination. And
Mm-hmm.
most importantly, we also make sure we give visibility into how their team is doing today and how they can contribute more to the overall success.
Mm-hmm.
So that's
Absolutely.
something I think sharing that high level picture, right, and sharing that whole path to success is critical.
Mm-hmm. And I think we spoke about this with Ankur Munake, who is the senior director of AI products over at Honeywell, and
Hmm.
we talked about how he scaled AI solutions across the
Hmm.
organization. And we didn't talk about specifically this of reining the business stakeholders back in a little bit, or they need to kind of control expectations and make sure that the
Hmm.
right narrative is running the show. Um, but in that sense, I see that also something that can be useful is, which usually you don't necessarily want to do, like make
Hmm.
people, concerned, or you don't want people to worry. But in these cases, you can
Hmm.
actually bring examples of the risks that are associated with jumping in too quick and
Hmm.
then actually not building on the solid data foundations. Connected to that, by the way, so the data literacy piece, you already mentioned data literacy
Hmm.
as well. There are competing schools of driving data literacy in an organization. First of all,
Hmm.
what does data literacy mean to you? Because different people
Hmm.
mean different things. Some people
Hmm.
say that data literacy is about getting everyone in the business to understand what the data mesh is,
Hmm.
and for some people it's more about the fluency with which people can interact and leverage data
Hmm.
driven solutions. So, what is data literacy for you,
Hmm.
and what role does this play
Hmm.
in your data driven culture initiatives?
Yeah. So data literacy, like in my dictionary, this is really about the ability to read, understand, create, and communicate data as information. This is how I
Mhm.
see it, right?
Right.
Essentially, like using data as a language. So you have to be able to, speak it. You have to be able to use it fluently. And when you increase the data literacy, I think this is where I think definitely this is kind of like the cost we talk about. Why do people who speak the same language actually jive together much more easily? Because you lower the social cost. Same thing here. If we're
Right.
speaking the same language, I don't have to explain to you, I don't need to use an interpreter. And that actually carries the culture behind it, just like any other language we speak, right? As human
Mhm.
beings.
Right.
So the same thing. We're speaking the same. That means like we don't have the culture barrier. You understand why am I running an A/B test experiment when you are building a dashboard UI feature, right? I don't
Mhm.
have to explain to you the value of it. Like we just focus on actually get to it. Right. So I think that's where like bring people closer if we're speaking the same language. And it's also sometimes, which is also why it's most time consuming if people don't.
Okay.
Because then you're going to spend a lot of effort on trying to convince them. And at some point, you decide maybe it's not worthwhile because it just costs me so much energy that I almost don't want to do the actual data science work because it was so much time to uncover right where the data is, what do you mean by certain, and getting aligned on that metric. So I think
Mhm.
that's where this is so critical because now you're speaking the same language and you're on the same level and same.
And how do you balance that tension between the business becoming more data literate and the responsibility and the burden of the data teams to become more business literate, right? So where is that space that you're
Mhm.
actually having what is that commonly agreed language that you're all going to speak, right? So actually, even in
Mhm.
our advanced business communications for data
Mhm.
storytellers course, is a huge part of it of finding the right language market fit in a
Mhm.
way. So when you're basically
Mhm.
marketing these data-driven solutions in the business, so
Mhm.
how much emphasis do you put on bringing the business up to your level of data
Mhm.
literacy, and how much are you going to go in their
Mhm.
direction to meet
Mhm.
them where they are, right? Do you have any
Yeah.
thoughts around that?
Yeah, fabulous question. I'll be honest, like I don't know if I can answer this in the most comprehensive way,
Sure.
but I'll give you one um, tactic or example that I learned I thought was quite helpful for me. So they were talking about, let's say you're running an A/B test, right? Then you learn that this A/B test result was actually not that positive, right? Because we see
Mhm.
that, for example, you're looking for a 15% increase on your conversion rate, you actually only say something like 2 to 3%. Like typically, as a data scientist, we would basically say, okay, this is neutral, right? There is risk of ruling out because you're just breaking even. And then from a business perspective, especially PMs, they always want to drive that forward. Said, okay, I see a positive, even though you tell me it's not statistically significant, quote, quote, but it's, hey, still 2 to 3% practical difference. And that's where a lot of the come in is the way that I read this from somewhere. They said, think about if we are the owner, like data scientist as an owner, like would I advise you something that is going to give negative impact on the business, right? If I know this was going to be negative on the business and you and I are essentially on the same boat, I wouldn't. So me advising you to not go ahead with this essentially is saying we have the shared interest. So kind of, argue from the counterpoint, right?
Mm.
Saying like, I wouldn't have given you something. I'm not asking you to not to, but the reason is because I know the risk associated with that. So then let's talk about how we can work together to actually get to a version that's going to show meaningful outcome to the customer with, understandable or informed risk ahead of us.
No,
So
those are great insights, actually.
yeah. So I mean, like I said, I don't know if I answer your question entirely, but this is something that I felt as a good example could point to some of the ways to bridge that gap.
Absolutely, and it's an ongoing conversation too. This is kind of like the cutting edge of data-driven business transformation in general. In all the industries, this is where's that sweet spot, and we definitely have seen companies kind of fall into a pattern where they expect too much from the business. So they perceive a gap between the business and data, and the immediate solution that they see that's intuitive for them is that, oh, they don't understand what I'm saying, so I need to educate them and bring them up to my level, which, by the way, is not like a fundamentally flawed approach by any means, right?
Yeah.
But a lot of times is actually much more time efficient, and also more effective if you kind of do the legwork first and meet them where they are. Kind of the pacing
Right.
leading approach, right? So first pace your stakeholders, and then invite them into a new reality, which in this case could be like actually upskilling them and getting people excited about data and getting them to learn and expand their skill sets based on that. So that's great. Finally, in your playbook, you mentioned the decision-making side of things. So it had to do with planning, prioritization, feedback measurement, both at corporate and the individual levels, right? So would you mind talking about that a little bit?
Could you repeat that? I think I missed it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So at the end of your playbook, you talked about decision making. It was about
Mhm.
adopting it in your decision making. So you talked
Right.
about employing a mechanism for planning, prioritization, and feedback measurement, both at the
Mhm.
corporate and the individual levels, and
Mhm.
also taking a methodical approach guided by principles in your decision making and being
Right.
comfortable and confident in articulating the choices
Mhm.
that you make, right? So why did you think that this was like an important part of your playbook after covering everything around data
Mhm.
maturity and data literacy? Do you have some thoughts around that?
Right. So the reason that talk about this like adopted decision making, it goes both like to the senior leaders all the way to ICs on the team, and the example like I probably shared earlier is about if I am I'm a data leader and oftentimes tasked with choosing the right choices of tools and platforms, right, for the technical stack, and I would actually apply the same methodology. Like, what's the angle? Like, what are the key measurements that I'm going to get when I bring this particular platform on board, right? So we spoke earlier about ROI. Like, exactly, I'm looking at impact, particularly on customer front, impact on internally, right? Both qualitative and quantitatively, and then we'll take that into my POC stage. Right. Evaluating the different tools, thinking about that very holistically, and then share like this approach and share the results, right, with cross-functional partners to get buy-in and get alignment. So if I just go in and I become very biased and not objective in the selection of those evaluation criteria, then I haven't done enough job as a data leader to speak with my action how you make a decision with data. Right. So I think like a lot of it is about how I lead by example, how I come in. So only if my decision making, everything I do are truly embodying that, I would say like idea, then others can see and they will be able to, willing to partner with you a lot more.
Yeah, absolutely. I just realized that we're coming up against the hour, and I enjoyed our conversation immensely. Maybe some closing thoughts. Like, what are you most excited about right now
Mhm.
in the industry? Like, data-driven business transformation is going a million miles an hour.
Mhm.
Gen AI and all that. Like, in
Mhm.
this whole landscape, what are you most excited about right now?
Yeah, I definitely say a lot of the advancement made in AI has made it at least seems, though I'm still need personally, I need to really prove that out with all the work we're doing. Being able to democratize and making it easier for people to have access to these, used to be advanced technology. One thing very interesting, this again, like my technical hat is on. Like recently, we were discussing about, large language models for time series model forecast, right? Because in the past, your time series model forecast has to be more purpose-built model. It's time consuming, you identify what's the pattern, and then you produce it. Apparently, folks out there doing research was able to use large language model as it is to predict these time series at a pretty good accuracy compared to these purpose-built model. That's huge because for a network industry like ours, this is going to save us tremendous amount of time in developing those case-by-case examples and models. And I
Mm-hmm.
think this was not thought about before.
Yeah.
This was made available to us. So almost a sudden, all of a sudden, the data scientists no longer focus on model development. You're applying the model, right? And identify the suitable scenarios for it to actually excel. So I think that's something it's a mind shift and eye opening for me, and also some exciting things we tweeted during the hackathon week this week, and we're seeing promising outcome.
Well, it's definitely going to be an exciting year. And look, I really enjoyed our conversation. And we also look forward to working with you this year. We're going to have a few exciting projects as well. So thank you for
Awesome.
your
Yeah.
time. And until next time.
Yep. Thank you.